Today, Mansoor, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. So today we have two papers. The first one is Marriage Market in Pakistan, Consanguinity, Educational Assorted Mating, and Fertility. The authors are Dr. Saima Bashir, Dr. Saman Nazir, and the discussant is Dr. Zahra Gardesi. Then the second paper is The Cost of Internet, Examining the Supply Side. The authors are Fiza Khalid Butt, Saddam Hussain, and Muhammad Shaf Najib. And the discussant is Dr. Shujat Farooq. Dr. Shujat is indisposed, and Ms. Ambareen Qayyum would be the discussant. So let's start with first paper. I will invite the authors to present the paper. Who will be presenting? Dr. Simon?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Dr. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, sir. Let me share my screen first. Okay, thank you so much, and Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So today we are presenting our paper on marriage market in Pakistan, consanguinity, educational assortative mating, and fertility. So before moving on, I just want to share how the idea for this paper came in. So we were looking at different statistics of demographic statistics, and as we all know that fertility transition is stagnant in Pakistan, and in fact, the contraceptive use has declined a percentage point in last 5 years. So things are not moving in the direction which they were expected to be when in 1990 the fertility declines started rolling in. So when we were looking at the literature, we saw that most of the literature on fertility and contraceptive use and all those things is mostly related to those traditional definition, like because of determinants of contraceptive use, children ever born, and what are the determinants and sort of.
Dr. Simon, there is slight echo or something like this. Can you check, or can some IT person check? So please go ahead, but.
Okay. So we looked at the socio-cultural aspect, which might be a hindrance in fertility decline in Pakistan. So nearly half of all marriages in Pakistan are consanguineous in nature, with 29 and 21% of women marrying first cousin, either on their father's and mother's side. Preference for consanguineous marriage is linked to several social and cultural aspects that exist in a society. For instance, agnatic solidarity, effort to enhance familial bond, economic considerations related to dowry, family supports in times of marital conflict, and relatively less independence for the mate selection in a culture. However, the preference for a particular type of marital relationship could have implications on broader familial context and outcomes. Studies from different countries suggest a positive association.
Dr. Saima, we have lost your voice.
Madam Saima, can you please unmute yourself?
I'm already unmuted. जी, आवाज आ रही है?
जी जी आ रही है। स्क्रीन शेयर कर लो कर लो।
स्क्रीन ऑलरेडी शेयर्ड है, नहीं हो रही?
नहीं, दोबारा डिस्कनेक्ट हो गई थी स्क्रीन, दोबारा कर ले कर।
अच्छा, हैंग हो गया है, I don't know why. Okay, 1 second. I'm sorry for the delay, but it's not in our control.
Now we can see your screen.
मैं दोबारा से स्टार्ट करूं या जहां से मैंने छोड़ा था?
नहीं, जहां से छोड़ा था.
Okay. So consanguinity have implications on broader familial context and outcomes. For instance, different studies from different countries suggest a positive association of consanguineous marriages with high fertility, women's young age at marriage, early childbearing, and child mortality. Previous studies on consanguineous unions at the national level in Pakistan were done a long time ago. So the last study which we found was done on the 1990 data, and it was published in 1999. After that, we could not find even a single study at national level. There are a couple of studies, but they are mostly clinical based. So we wanted to look at the trends over time in relationship preferences and its interaction with education, mate selection, and fertility behavior in Pakistan. Why we are doing so? Because a lot has been changed in terms of educational levels, gender dynamics, social norms, and practices in last 3 decades. For instance, school enrollment rates for females at the tertiary level have increased from less than 1% in 1992 to around 9% in 2018. Similarly, educational attainment for women with at least bachelor's or equivalent degrees rise to around 6% in 2015 from less than 2% in 2011. So all these things compelled us to look at the marriage patterns in Pakistan. So basically we have 4 research questions which we are looking at. First, what are the relationship trends prevailing in the Pakistan marriage market in last 3 decades? Second, how is improvement in women's education linked to changes in educational authoritative matching patterns? Is the Pakistani marriage market shifting from hypergamous to hypogamous unions? And does educational authoritative mating influence consanguinity in Pakistan? Traditionally, the South Asian marriage market remains educationally hypergamous in nature. Hypergamous means when husband is more educated than wife. However, we thought that it would be interesting to study whether educational transition and shifting this trend towards more homogamous, in which both have the similar level of education, or hypogamous in context of consanguineous marriages in Pakistan. And hypogamy is defined as when wife is more educated than husband. As I mentioned earlier, women in consanguineous union get married early, hence having few chances to be in higher education. Therefore, we expect that consanguineous union would still be predominantly hypergamous in Pakistan, whereas non-cousin unions may be shifting towards educationally hypogamous marriages. Fourth, we wanted to know to what extent does a particular type of relationship explain fertility behavior, namely mean age at marriage, the mean number of children, and contraceptive use. In South Asia, compared to those married to known relatives, women in first cousin unions have high fertility. On the other hand, consanguineous unions are associated with increased mortality and negative reproductive outcomes. However, literature is not conclusive on the link between consanguinity and fetal loss. The high prevalence of fertility among consanguineous union in Pakistan could be due to those mentioned above negative reproductive outcomes, but we also suspect a strong social dimension is linked to it. With the weak institutional support for childcare in the country, families from both maternal and paternal sides usually take part in rearing children. The couples in consanguineous unions may be getting more support in rearing children from their own family, hence opting for having more children than couples in the non-cousin marriages. Therefore, we expect that couples in cousin marriages have higher mean children ever born and low contraceptive use. To examine all these 4 questions, we used 4 rounds of Pakistan Demographic Health Survey. And all these, like the analysis spans almost 30 years from 1990 to 2017-18. We use DHS because DHS collected detailed information on mother and child health, fertility history, family planning, reproductive health, nutritional and immunization status, marriage and sexual activity, and husband's background, and all those variables or information which we needed. Demographic health survey is the most reliable data in that context. Various pre-analysis exclusion criteria are applied. to reach at the final analytical samples. We excluded women who reported more than one marital union and had missing information on the number of unions. Further, we drop women whose information on the relationship with their husband is missing. Here we mean with the relationship with their husband means whether they are in first cousin union, second cousin union, or with non-relatives. We also excluded women who either did not provide information on their husband's education or didn't know about their husband's education at all. To answer those 4 research questions, we have 3 dependent variables, consanguineous versus non-consanguineous marriages. For the bivariate analysis, we define consanguineous, this variable as first cousin, second cousin, and unrelated. But for multivariate analysis, we converted it into a dichotomous, that is consanguineous versus non-consanguineous unions. Then average use of contraception is our second dependent variable. This question is asked only of wives and is based on the question, have you ever used any method to delay or avoid getting pregnant? And it is dichotomous in nature and refers to both modern and traditional methods. If a woman reported that she used any method, she was coded 1 for otherwise. And mean children ever born contains information on the number of all children born alive up to the survey date. So it is treated as an interval scale in both bivariate and multivariate analysis. We have 2 main independent variables, that is women's education and spousal educational homogamy. Women's education is categorized into 3 categories, that is no formal education, primary education, grade 1 to 5, secondary education, grade 6 to 10, and higher education, that is grade 11 and above. And spousal educational homogamy is measured as the same level of education. The husband is less educated than the wife, husband is more educated than wife, and both have no formal or below primary education. The same level of education is treated as, usually it is that both have the same level of education, but in this paper we treated it as in which both and husband and wife had at least a primary level of education. So it's a little change from the traditional literature which is available. Further, we also control for change over time. Survey years are included to examine change over time. And various socio-demographic and economic variables are included as control in the study. So this is the first graphical representation of trends over time in consanguineous marriages. So here, we just provided the data labels for first cousin unions and unrelated, because we see that in the second cousin marriages, there is no variation at all. So during last 3 decades, the pattern of marriages exhibit little variations with predominantly cousin marriages. Like you can see that more than 50% of the marriages are among the first cousins, either from the maternal or paternal side. And only 1/3 of the marriages are non-consanguineous unions. Then next we are looking at the educational assortative mating. You see that predominantly the couples are mostly in the union are mostly hypergamous in nature, in which husband is more education across all time periods. However, some interesting changes are observed in spousal educational differences. As mentioned earlier, since 1990, there is a substantial improvement in women's educational statistics. And this pattern of increase in women's education is reflecting in the marriage market as well. Though educational hypergamy still persists, as you can see from here, a consistent educational hypogamy pattern is emerging over time. There are only 4% of couples in which wife was more educated than her husband in 1990, and it has moved to 17% in 2017-18. And another thing which we can see that is from this graph is that there is a considerable decline in couples with no formal education. So there is some educational pattern is evident in this. And in another way, we can see that this graph is based on only heterogeneous couples in which either husband is more educated than wife, or wife is more educated than husband. And you can see that educational hypogamy pattern is observed that there is an increase in couples in which wife is more educated than her husband over time. Here in this graph, we have looked at the relationship between consanguinity and educational authoritative mating. So it shows that the association between formal education and consanguinity is still prevalent. Okay, the phenomena of educational hypogamy or homogamy is more common among non-cousin marriages than cousin marriages, whereas cousin marriages are more common among hypergamous couples, that is, husband is more educated than his wife, or both spouses have no formal education. So in short, cousin marriages are more common among hypergamous couples. That is totally in line with the literature that suggests that cousin marriages are mostly happen in which either husband is more educated than wife or both have no formal education. However, the study has not found any substantial variation in educational authoritative mating by relationship type over time. But like pattern is observed that non-cousin marriages are more towards the homogamous or hypogamous in nature. So for the first part, this table shows the logistic regression predicting consanguineous marriages over time. In the model one, we only added the time variable. In model two, we added our two main independent variables, women's education and spousal education, homogamy, and model three has all the controls in it. So the result shows that women with higher education are 60% less likely to be in cousin marriages. Similarly, women with secondary education are 42% and with primary education are 20% less likely to be in cousin marriages than women with no formal education. So this results support our hypothesis that cousin marriages are more common among women with low level of education. Model 2 also shows that couples in which husbands are more educated than wives are 26% have a 26% higher likelihood of entering into cousin marriages than those in which both have the same level of education. Again, this result is in line with other studies that cousin marriages are mostly hypergamous in nature, and also the traditional family context is also evident from this, because in our culture, like boys' education is more preferred than the wives. However, the study did not find the support for the hypothesis that the odds of non-consanguineous marriages will be higher in hypogamous couples. Next, we move to our second set of analysis, in which we wanted to look at the relationship between consanguinity and fertility. So as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, that we use three variables to examine the relationship between cousin marriages and fertility, namely mean age at marriage, contraceptive use, and children ever born. This graph shows that mean age at marriage has significantly increased over time across all the relationship types. However, the increase is much higher among non-cousin marriages. In 1990, the mean age at marriage among unrelated couple was 18.3, which has increased to 20.2. In other words, mean age at marriage is 1.1 year higher among non-cousin marriages than cousin marriages in 2017-18. This graph shows the relationship between consanguinity and contraceptive use. Interestingly, the use of contraception showed a different pattern. Contrary to our expectation, contraception is significantly higher in first cousin marriages than non-cousin marriages over time. Though a decline is observed in contraceptive use among cousin marriages, and catch-up trend in contraception is observed recently among non-cousin relationships, but still contraceptive use is much higher in cousin marriages. That is like intriguing finding in a way. And the relationship between consanguinity and mean number of children ever born, that means so far, births have changed over time. In 1990, if you look at the graph, the mean number of children ever born were higher among unrelated couples as compared to the couples in first cousin or second cousin unions. However, this relationship has reversed over time, and now mean number of children ever born are higher in cousin marriages than among unrelated couples. So the transition is in that way is observed among cousin and non-cousin marriages. the higher mean number of children ever born in cousin marriages could be the result of high child mortality among cousin marriages. Like if we see that there is a pattern in which now the cousin marriage, mean fertility in cousin marriages is higher than unrelated. So it could be the result of the child mortality. And this is confirmed by experience of child loss by relationship type. We are not showing that graph over here, but it shows that the pattern of child mortality remains consistent over time with predominantly higher child mortality among first cousin marriages and lower in marriages among unrelated couples. So it means that this high fertility among cousin marriages could be the result of replacement strategy of the child loss. This table shows the logistic regression results that predict contraceptive use by cousin marriages and education. The result shows that contraceptive use has significantly increased over time. The most significant change is observed in 2012-13, in which the odds of using contraception is 4.6 times as high compared to 1990. And these findings are consistent with the overall pattern of contraceptive use among women aged 15 to 49 in Pakistan. According to Demographic Health Survey, contraceptive use was around 35% in 2012-13 before reaching a plateau. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, a percentage decline in contraceptive use is reported in 2017-18. Further, the result shows that the contraceptive use is 20% lower among women in cousin marriages than non-cousin marriages. The results support our hypothesis of low contraceptive use in consanguineous unions. Further, the findings also indicate that contraceptive use is higher across all educational categories, but more so for women with higher education. As we can see that women with higher education are 2 times more likely to use contraception as compared to women with no formal education. Similarly, a woman in hypogamous couple, in which wife is more educated than her husband, and couples in which both have no formal education are less likely to use contraceptives than couples in which both spouses have similar levels of education. And this is the multiple linear regression model that predicts children ever born by consanguinity and education, because our children ever born is a continuous scale, and the mean here we analyze the mean number of children ever born. Results show that there is a significant positive association between survey year and children ever born. Further, we see that women in consanguineous unions are likely to have fewer children than women in non-consanguineous marriages. The result further shows that women with primary and secondary education tend to have fewer children than women with no formal education. Similarly, women in hypogamous relationships are likely to have fewer children than women in which both partners have the same level of education. In model 3, we added various socio-demographic contours, and when we added that, one thing which we observed was that the direction and significance of the relationship between main variable of interest remains the same, though we observed the substantial reduction in the magnitude of the coefficient. The effect of time, consanguinity, and female education is much smaller in the full model. Our analysis shows that experience of child loss significantly influences mean fertility. In other words, we can say that women who experience child loss tend to have more children than women who had not experienced any child mortality. Overall, model 3 shows that differentials in fertility are mainly driven by reproductive compensation for child loss. I'm not showing the full model over here because of so that we can only focus on the main variable of interest, but our result shows that the differentials are mainly driven by the variable. We added the variable of child loss in the full model. So to summarize our results, the pattern of consanguineous marriages remains stable over time, with almost half of the women married to their cousins from 1990 to 2018. In fact, the consanguineous marriages increase over time by around 30%. And the same pattern is observed in some other countries such as Yemen, Turkey, and Iran, where the consanguineous unions are more common. We then examined that how women's education and spousal educational homogamy are associated with consanguineous unions. We test the hypothesis that with an increase in education, a decrease in consanguinity will be observed because of an increased pool of marriageable men due to their exposure to men outside their families, because when the women are entering into higher education, and they are more exposed to an extended marriageable pool. But we observed that an increase in women's education has led to changes in the marriage market and assortative mating patterns. Women with higher education are significantly less likely to be in cousin marriages than women with no formal education. We find partial support to our hypothesis too, that consanguineous unions will still be predominantly hypergamous in nature. That's the results are supporting this part, but whereas non-consanguineous union may be shifting towards educationally hypogamous or homogamous marriages over time. Educational hypergamy in marriage market still persists. However, a consistent pattern of educational hypogamy is emerging over time. Further, though insignificant, the result indicated that hypogamy is positively associated with consanguineous unions, as found in other studies. Though surprising, but in Pakistan's cultural context, we think that it makes sense because most of the marriages in Pakistan are arranged by parents, and women have little say in this decision, irrespective of their education status. Similarly, as evident from result, despite the increase in women education, trends of consanguineous marriages remains unchanged in Pakistan, as we saw the first graphical presentation. This norm significantly reduces the pool of marriageable men, and given the universal nature of marriage, marrying men with lower education could be more of a necessity than a choice. Next, we looked at how fertility behaviors, namely contraceptive use and children ever born, are influenced by consanguineous unions. As expected and observed in other studies, contraceptive use is 20% lower among women in consanguineous marriages than non-cousin marriages. The inverse relationship between the mean fertility and cousin marriages is observed. This contradicts the studies that found higher fertility in consanguineous unions as a replacement. But this higher fertility could be response to high child mortality in Pakistan context. When it comes to Pakistan, the result, and they argue that this may result from random underreporting of fertility figures or some misclassification of women by consanguinity status. Further, we observe that educated women, particularly women with primary education, are significantly likely to have fewer children than women with no formal education, and mean fertility is lower among hypogamous couples. So in conclusion, our study suggests that societal changes such as improvement in women's education and urbanization over time have not led to a decline in cousin marriages in Pakistan. And based on our result, without a substantial change, the decline in fertility seems non-promising. In our view, expansion of education, particularly in the context of gender gap, is not enough. Participation of young women in formal job market is a condition, because until and unless the opportunity cost for having more children is raised, we don't see in near future that the fertility will decline in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saima. So, and thank you for presenting the relationship in detail. And let's hear from the discussant, Dr. Zahra Gardezi. Dr. Zahra, over to you. Your mic is mute.
Thank you, Dr. Dries, and thank you, Saima. That was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed reading your paper. I think the analysis was done very much in depth. Before I move on to my points, I want to ask why you would expect that a rise in hypogamy, which is a wife more educated than a male, would have a relationship with cousin marriages or consanguineous marriages.
Actually, Zara, we are saying that when wife is more educated, like with increasing women education, okay, so when women are going into tertiary level education or bachelor's and in postgraduate institution, they are more exposed to the a large marriageable pool of men. Okay, so we were expecting that in the women with high level of education would more likely to be in non-cousin marriages. Okay, but actually that is happening, but not at that fast pace as we were expecting. So they are still more into that cousin marriages, and particularly I think this is more towards the culture, because in our culture, as I mentioned before, we are more comfortable when our daughters and sons are marrying in our own family because of the solidarity measures, because of some dowry expectations, and some other. There is a huge debate on that.
I understand. So the reason I asked you this is because in your paper, I thought that you maybe need to elaborate on this discussion of why hypergamy in particular would in any way positively or negatively be affected by, would positively or negatively affect the marriage market. But I understand from your presentation that the assortment, the educational assortment, is essentially like a proxy for women being more empowered or women getting more education, and that in turn having an effect.
Right.
So
right.
in light of that, I think the story that your paper is telling is that women are becoming more educated, and the evidence for their higher level of education is the increase in hypogamy or the change in educational assorting behavior. But your results show that the marriage market, so to speak, is very rigid, and that the trend regarding cousin marriages is more or less consistent.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that an adequate summary?
Yeah, that's what it is.
On that, maybe what you could add here is a discussion of the social, cultural, and financial. You do briefly get into that, but maybe the structure of your paper would benefit more if you sort of provide the educational assortment evidence as sort of a baseline for why you're looking at cousin marriages. So there is evidence that women are getting more educated, and that is why you would expect a change in a possible change, why it is useful to examine the marriage market, because to have a rationale, and I think that you provide a very good rationale in the form of educational assortment behavior. And I think that leaves you with a lot of room to then talk about the financial constraints. And here you could also talk about policy, where you could say that there is a lack of institutional care or child care, and because of that, there may be sort of a greater incidence of cousin marriages. And I think beyond that, what was of most interest to me from a policy perspective was that you've talked about how within the cousin marriages, and I'm sort of taking the broad results, within cousin marriages, there is very low fertility, despite there being a very low use of contraceptives, right? And you say that this could be because of high infant mortality, right? Simon?
We are saying that high fertility in cousin marriages, and that could be the result of high infant mortality.
Precisely. So that's a policy angle that you should put into your paper. I think in terms of policy, you're saying that the marriage market is very rigid. People will not change their trends towards consanguineous marriages. So there will be a high incidence of consanguineous marriages that has persisted over all these years since the 1990s. And then you should put in some literature, or I think it would sort of the discussion in terms of policy is that because these marriages are linked to higher infant mortality, possibly infant mortality, or mortality, child mortality in some way, that maybe there is this policy angle that the government needs to proactively ask women to get sort of tested during the prenatal period or take prenatal supplements. I think I think because of my own interest in health, that is the angle that I think was maybe missing, the discussion of health outcomes. Because again, the results that you're showing are essentially that fertility is low despite a low use of contraceptives, right? In cousin marriages, I'm talking about your regression estimate.
Fertility is not low, fertility is high. Fertility is high in cousin marriages. That's what it is over time. Okay, so in 1990 the pattern was reversed, but over time that there is a reversal is observed in which the cousin fertility in cousin marriages is high than among unrelated couples, and that because we measured fertility with the children ever born, that takes into account the children who are like who died during infancy or under five mortality. So, and we have not shown that result because we thought that these are out of the context in this, but we also observed that the child mortality or infant mortality, both of these indicators are much higher in cousin marriages than non-cousin marriages, and that's making the fertility in cousin marriages much higher because they are using high fertility as a replacement strategy for child loss. That's what we said.
In literature, fertility is not measured as children ever born. I think it is measured as alive children ever born. But there are two variables that you use. You use the mean.
There are two different variables. Usually the literature, mainly we use children ever born as the measure of fertility, okay? So, but you can also look into number of living children as well, okay? And again, we also control for the child loss in our full model, as you have seen in the paper. And that shows that this high fertility is mainly driven by the, as a replacement strategy for child loss.
Dr. Zaira, probably you can complete your comments and then Dr. Saima can respond in one go.
All right. So in terms of fertility, I think you and I are saying the same thing. We're basically saying that women, for whatever reason, are losing a sort of, the number of children is lower, but the number of children ever born is high, which is essentially indicating towards high mortality rate, child mortality. And I think within your paper, there is space to talk about the health policy aspects as to whether, because of the persistent trend in cousin marriages, you could sort of talk about that since the trend is not changing, there is room for policy intervention where the government informs or carries out some prenatal intervention where the sort of, where there is sort of informational interventions about medical checkups during pregnancy and prenatal care. But beyond that, I think that in your regression estimates, I would sort of revisit the discussion on hypergamy and hypergamous and hypogamous marriages, because I think that really changes with the baseline. And I think as a base variable, maybe even same education is not the interpretation that you're giving might actually be more relevant if the base variable is either hypergamous or homogamous, because then in reference to that, it would be easier to make a conclusion. Yeah. I actually have a number of suggestions for the model. Please include some measure of a goodness of fit. And I think there are some variable calculations that I can sort of go over with you at a later point, because I don't want to take up too much time, and we can discuss that. But those are specific to the model. I think in terms of the overall paper, I thought the analysis was very well done, and sort of it just needs a little bit of that policy angle. Otherwise, I really enjoyed the paper. Good job.
Thank you so much, Zara, for your detailed comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Zaira. If you can give these comments in writing as well, and just in bullet points to Dr. Saima, that would be great. Saima, do you have to say something further? Otherwise, we can.
Okay. Dr. Idris, I think we discussed already. So once again, I want to thank you, Dr. Zaira, for such detailed and detailed comments. I really enjoyed. Thank you.
And it would be great if you and Zaira can discuss offline as well. So
sure.
Any questions from the floor? I don't see any hands. Okay, I think, Dr. Simon, you said that you were expecting that at some point the husband, the wife would be more educated than the husband, and you don't see this trend a lot. Did you say this or something like this?
सॉरी अजीत सर, मैं आपको सही तरह सुन नहीं पाई, आप दोबारा फ्रेज करेंगे
मैं कहा
क्वेश्चन?
कुछ शायद आपने ये इस तरह कहा कि होना ये चाहिए कि एजुकेशन की वजह से द वाइफ शुड बी मोर एजुकेटेड, ये पैटर्न नजर आना चाहिए था लेकिन नजर नहीं आ रहा, ऐसा ही है?
सर मैं ये कह रही हूँ कि ये पैटर्न तो नजर आ रहा है, लेकिन वो आपकी मैरिज मार्केट को चेंज नहीं कर रहा। जैसे ज़ारा ने बड़ा अच्छा वो यूज किया कि योर मैरिज मार्केट इज स्टिल वेरी रिजिड। So we are expecting as women education is improving and they are exposed to outer world and there is a large marriageable pool of men available outside your family. So parent marriage market should change, but that is not happening in Pakistan.
There is one question from Mr. Imran. Imran, please go ahead. Imran साहब अपना माइक अनम्यूट करें।
Can you hear me now? Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. My name is Imran Nazir. I'm a clinical psychologist and very first timer to this webinar. Thank you so very much for the very interesting paper. I'm a clinical psychologist as well as I'm into disability and development. मेरा छोटा सा क्वेश्चन तो नहीं है, खैर ये सजेशन है क्योंकि बड़ी आपने डॉक्टर साहब ने बड़ी अच्छा साइमा ने पेपर प्रेजेंट किया। I joined it halfway through. थोड़ा सा अगर इसमें काइंडली फॉर द फ्यूचर, क्योंकि आप लोग इतनी मेहनत करते हैं और इतने मजे की चीज़ों को एक्सप्लोर करते हैं कोरिलेशन उनका फाइंड आउट करने के लिए, कजन मैरिजेस में एक बड़ी टिपिकल हाइपोथेसिस है जिसमें ज़ाहिर कंट्रोवर्सी है कि कजन मैरिजेस से पर्सन विद चिल्ड्रन विद डिसेबिलिटीज इज वन ऑफ द कॉज कजन मैरिजेस जो है। तो इस पे अगर फॉर द फ्यूचर जिन लोगों ने इस पे काम करना है इस तरह के टॉपिक्स पे, अगर वो 2-4 सवाल उससे रिलेटेड भी ऐड कर लें, एंड आई विल बी वेरी मच अवेलेबल एंड हैप्पी टू हैव क्वेश्चंस एंड सपोर्ट देम इन व्हाटएवर वे पॉसिबल। तो इट वुड बी इंटरेस्टिंग कि हम लोग जहाँ और बहुत से वेरिएबल्स को कर रहे हैं, डिसेबिलिटी चूँकि हमारा बहुत बड़ा इशू है पाकिस्तान में, स्पेशली बच्चों का, और उसका जो एक वजह बताई जाती है अमंग अदर फैक्टर्स दैट इज कजन मैरिजेस। तो इसको अगर एक्सप्लोर कर दिए दैट वुड बी अ ग्रेट सपोर्ट फॉर द workers and the families who are suffering and having issues due to the children with
Thank you,
disabilities.
Imran sir. It's a good suggestion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Simon, should I move to next? So we have the next paper by Internet. It's about Internet for All, examining the supply side, the cost, and the discussants, the authors are Fiza Bhatt, Saddam Hussain, and Shaf Najib. So who is presenting? And the discussant is Ms. Ambreen Qayyum, and I would request Ms. Saba Anwar as well, as they are both working on this as well, to jump into the discussion once the presentation is over. So who is presenting?
Sir, we all three will be presenting. हमने slides अलग-अलग की हैं. So first I'll give the intro and then Fiza will chip in and then analysis or conclusion पे Shaf आएंगे. So let me share slide with you.
ये स्टूडेंट्स की वैल्यूएशन वैसा नहीं होनी है, आप स्टूडेंट के वैल्यूएशन के पैटर्न पे जाएं। चलें, ठीक है,
ऐसा ही
करें। प्लीज ट्राई टू कवर इन 20 मिनट्स की।
जी सर। हमारा पेपर है द कॉस्ट ऑफ इंटरनेट provision examining the supply side कि अगर हम इंटरनेट सप्लाई करते हैं, if we provide the internet, so उसकी क्या मुख्तलिफ जो dynamics होंगे. We are basically focused on the cost कि क्या आएगी cost internet provision की, but what was the idea behind this? So first of all, internet has brought a revolution, or in developing countries it's been transformed into internet of things, जिसमें e-education, e-health, e-commerce वगैरह मुख्तलिफ चीज़ों में use हो रहा है. As you can see on the picture, everything is linked. It acts like a glue which binds all the sector of the economy together, and it reduces the cost of transaction. तो इसका ये बड़ा advantage है. But हमने देखा कि in developed world it has been used extensively, but हमारे यहाँ उतना extensively use नहीं हुआ है. इसका कसूर जो leadership है उसके ऊपर भी आता है, हमारे attitudes के ऊपर भी आता है, और the provision of internet के ऊपर भी आता है. We were still the old school, हमने उसी तरह काम करना है on paper और चीजें उसी तरह करनी है. So internet को हमने in developing countries was only limited to research, entertainment और email. बस इसके अलावा हमने इंटरनेट का सही से इस्तेमाल नहीं किया. इंटरनेट को हमने समझा कि इट्स एन एडेड व्हील टू द इकोनॉमी, जबकि आजकल इट इज द इंजन ऑफ द इकोनॉमी. फिर आया जी ग्लोबल पेंडेमिक, जिसको हम क्रिटिकल जंक्चर भी इन अ सेंस वी कैन से, इन द डिस्टेंट पॉसिबिलिटी वी कैन से इट, कि ग्लोबल पेंडेमिक आया, रोड्स बंद हो गई, एजुकेशन इंस्टीट्यूट्स बंद हो गए, अस्पताल बंद हो गए, फ्लाइट्स बंद हो गई, तो सब चीजें एक केम एट अ हॉल्ट, सब चीजें स्टॉप हो गई. बट वहाँ पे इंटरनेट आया एज अ सपोर्ट. हमने एजुकेशन की रिज्यूम थ्रू इंटरनेट, हमने हेल्थ रिज्यूम की थ्रू इंटरनेट, हमने मीटिंग्स इंटरनेट पे कर दी, जूम की तरह प्लेटफॉर्म्स आ गए. बट डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज में इन डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज ये तो आम सी एक चीज थी, बट इन डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज हमें पता चला अच्छा ऐसा भी हो सकता है, वी कैन मीट ऑनलाइन, वी कैन प्रोवाइड एजुकेशन ऑनलाइन. बट वहाँ पे हमें जरूरत पड़ी नीड फॉर इंटरनेट. फिर हमें पता लगा इंटरनेट इज मिसिंग. कुछ लोग जो थे फार फ्लंग एरिया से, पाकिस्तान के रूरल एरिया से, पेंडेमिक आया, स्कूल बंद हो गए, उनको ऑनलाइन क्लासेस में इशू हो गए बिकॉज इंटरनेट ही था नहीं. जूम मीटिंग्स हुई, उसमें प्रॉब्लम्स आए, इंटरनेट जो स्टेबल इंटरनेट नहीं होता था, मीटिंग में प्रॉब्लम आए. आई वाज टीचिंग अ कोर्स विद इदरीस साहब, तो हमें बाज़ क्लासेस में हम जब उनको बच्चों को पढ़ा रहे होते थे तो वहाँ पे भी इंटरनेट के इश्यूज आए, बीच में आवाज ब्रेक होती थी, सब कुछ होता था. सो वहाँ से आइडिया
इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ टाइम जो बातें लोगों को अच्छी तरह मालूम है उससे
जी सर, तो वहाँ से आइडिया जनरेट हुआ जो फाइट का रिफॉर्म एजेंडा भी है. तो इसको हमने लिया एज अ विंडो ऑफ अपॉर्चुनिटी. देयर इज अ वॉइस जनरेटेड कि जी इंटरनेट होना चाहिए, स्टेट शुड प्रोवाइड इट, और जो भी हो सबके लिए इंटरनेट फॉर ऑल होना चाहिए. सो हमने इसके लिए कहा इंटरनेट होना तो चाहिए, बट हम अगर हुकूमत को बोलें या किसी को बताएं इन द पॉलिसी मेकिंग डोमेन, तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल हमें पता होना चाहिए कि कॉस्ट ऑफ इट, कि कितनी आएगी कॉस्ट, कितना खर्चा आएगा इसके ऊपर, इंटरनेट की प्रोविजन के ऊपर. तो उसके लिए हमने ये पेपर बनाया, उसके ऊपर मेथोडोलॉजी का वो लिखा है. नाउ फिजा विल चिप इन, वो आपको बताएंगे व्हाट मेथोडोलॉजी वी यूज और किस तरह से हमने इसको एक्सेस किया कॉस्ट ऑफ इट. जी फिजा,
the main objective, muted please, thank you. Okay, the main objective was
काइंडली स्पीकर भी ऑफ कर दीजिएगा.
स्पीकर बंद कर.
जी फिजा प्लीज.
जी सर, available of the country. So we found that there is a major issue of the costing of providing internet. The companies are not doing that because based on their profits and so many things. So the methodology that we used was mixed method. We did interviews which we analyze, and then for qualitative data, of course, they were informal interviews that we did to identify the major factors that are involved in costing and provision of the internet. And then we used the household and population census data, and we used the analogous estimation technique to quantify it to get a value. So the major limitations that we faced while doing this, the major limitations were those that there was no data. There was no data available on this kind of studies, that how we can provide internet access to the country and cost it, and people were not willing to share the data. So when we tried to contact the representatives of 3 major telecommunication providers in the country, because we thought that using the private sector and government helping them out is an easy way out, rather convincing government and officials to provide internet. So we did costing for them. They were not willing to share their data. Anyhow, after quite a lot of hard work and difficulties that we faced, we did interviews, and the interviews told us certain things, which are first of all infrastructure, and there is a major infrastructure variety available when they have to develop it. And there are varied factors which include area type, which include population, which include how they have already established systems there, or if they want to go there or not. And infrastructure specifications required the specific height of the tower, which they said that can be from 10 meters to 30 meters. Then they talked about the area coverage radius. It depends on the population as well. So, it can go from 2 kilometer to 10 kilometer. And it is also, dependent on the population, as I just mentioned, and the type of the area. The area types are different. When you are providing internet in a crowded, well-populated urban area, which is plain, the internet height, the zoning laws that are included in everything, that is different for them. And when we go to the hilly areas or deserted areas, the things become different then, and then they have to change their specifications. Then other infrastructure specifications are the height of the tower that I told you, that it can be from 10 to 30 meter. I have told you the radius of area coverage, and then microwave dishes with spectrum frequency that includes the frequency that they want to provide, either 2G, 3G, or 4G. And when we talked about the costing, the overall cost, they did not mention it, and they said that overall cost reaches from 8 million to 15 million, given the area type and all the other factors that are involved in that. And the types of expenditures are 2 types. One is CapEx and one is operating. So setting the tower at first, including all the spectrum frequency dishes and all that generators, whatever they require to run that particular setup, that is the capital expenditure. And then of course there are monthly expenses that are related to it. After that, we got the details of tower with all the things, and then we used population density survey, and Shaf will explain this to you. Thank
you. Okay, so basically, as Fiza explained, that a tower, depending on various factors, could actually, the height of the tower could vary from 10 meters to 60 meters, while the radius that it covers could range from even as low as 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers up till 10 kilometer radius, right? So based upon our interaction with the representatives of the industry, we you could say we actually came up with a certain criteria or the characteristics of towers to estimate the cost, right? So we decided to choose a 30-meter height of the tower with the 6 kilometer coverage radius, and the cost of setting up this tower would be around PKR 30 million.
Excuse me, Shah.
Yes, sir.
ये आपके रूम में दूसरा भी शायद ऑन है, मेरे ख्याल में उसको म्यूट कर दें।
जी
मैं स्पीकर बंद करना पड़ेगा।
Is it better now, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, the reason why we actually chose this was ताकि हमारा जो estimate है वो एक average टावर की estimate आए, ऐसी ना estimate आए जो कि शायद कुछ high cost की तरफ skewed हो, ना ही वो बहुत low cost की तरफ skewed हो, जहाँ पे शायद एक एक टावर ज्यादा बड़े एरिया को कवर करो. So we went for a rather you could say average kind of a tower, right? So as you can see, 30 meters height, coverage radius of 6 kilometers, and the cost was PKR 30 million. So we used the because radius में वो एक अपनी देता है सारी coverage. So we using the area formula as shown here in the equation 1 on the right side, we estimated that such a tower would be able to cover up till 113 kilometer squares of area, right? Costing PKR 30 million. Next slide. Next slide. It's not moving. Right. Okay, so is the next slide visible?
अभी हम cost 30 million पे हैं.
I think
All details.
थोड़ा सा internet issue है.
स्लाइड पे
जिसकी
क्लिक
वजह
करके
से
मूव करें, स्लाइड पे क्लिक करके मूव करें ना.
स्लाइड पे क्लिक कर नहीं, आई थिंक वो दूसरे लैपटॉप में से हो रहा है, जिससे
दोबारा शेयर करने हैं आप.
दोबारा शेयर कर. जस्ट अ सेकंड.
जी हम कॉस्ट कवरेज पे हैं, मस्तूंग गुजरात.
Yeah, so the cost of such a tower would be 10 million, not 30 million. I apologize for the typing error in this. It's 30 million. It's 10 million, right? So basically, depending on this, we actually chose 4 districts where we run our estimates based upon these characteristics. These districts were one district from each province, and this was the province with the median population. Once again, the idea was कि हम एक एवरेज कॉस्टिंग निकालें जो कि ना ऐसे एरिया पे हो जहां पे आपको थोड़े से एरिया के लिए ज्यादा टावर्स लगाने पड़ेंगे ड्यू टू हाई पॉपुलेशन डेंसिटी, और ना ही कोई ऐसे एरिया पे हो जहां पे आपकी कॉस्ट बहुत कम आए उसकी कवरेज प्रोवाइड करने की, बिकॉज आपको वहां पे पॉपुलेशन कम है, पॉपुलेशन ज्यादा फैली भी हो तो कम एक टावर ज्यादा एरिया को कर रहा हो. सो वी डिसाइडेड टू go with these 4 districts which had the median population. Now within these there was basically Mastung and Ladkana. These were in Balochistan and Sindh. We had in Balochistan and KPK. Sorry, in Balochistan and KPK we had odd number of districts. So therefore we actually जो दो median population वाले आ रहे थे उसमें से we chose the one with a higher population density. So as a result we got these 4 districts, and using the data from the 6th population and housing census 2017, we calculated the towers required and the installation cost for the entire district in these areas, right? Which turned out to be 29 towers in Mastung, 28 in Gujarat, 22 in Kohat, and 17 in Ladkana, based upon the characteristics that we showed in the previous slides. And the cost of these would be 292 million in Mastung, 282 in Gujarat, 225 in Kohat, and 172 in Ladkana. So this would be the cost that we estimated based on those characters to provide complete coverage to these districts. Next slide. Right now, as Fiza explained before, that the tower characteristics would actually differ based upon different geographical factors, right? So for instance, if there is a hilly area, you will have to change the tower height. If there is more population in a certain area, you might have to actually reduce the coverage area of every you could say the coverage radius of the tower, and so on, different things. So of course you cannot have standardized towers in every district, or not even in every area within a district. So we decided to change a little for Kohat and Mastung specifically, because these because Kohat is you could say a hilly area as compared to the other areas, whereas Mastung, which also is a hilly, slightly hilly area, but then again, it is also one with a lot less population density, right? So for Kohat, we increased the height from 30 meters to 45 meters, whereas also increased the coverage radius to 8 kilometers, right? So the cost rose from 10 million Pakistani rupees to 13 million. However, the number of towers required reduced to 13, which actually brought down the cost of coverage for the entire district to 169 million. Whereas for Mastung, we kept the height same at 30 meters, but we increased the coverage radius to 10 kilometers because of a lower population density, resulting in a cost of 12 million PKR for per tower. As a result, there were just 11 towers that we calculated would be needed with these characteristics, costing 132 million PKR, right? So the idea behind this was to come up with an estimate which would act as a reference point to not just to the telecom industry, but also to the government policymakers about how what would be the investment that the private sector would require, and how you could say the kind of facilitation that the government needs to provide them about to be able to give internet to all of Pakistan. And I think the policy recommendation and conclusion that we have is I will walk you through that.
So we concluded that internet is no more a luxury, no more and a third wheel to the economy, but it is a necessity now. In order to survive and to be the part of the developing countries, we have to have internet everywhere in the country. When we talk about the provision of internet, there can be an ease of provision for the multinationals because their towers, the 2G towers, are already existing in those areas, and the cost we made from the scratch, so it can give them an idea that this is the particular cost that they are aiming for, and once they are going to go there and do their groundwork and their field work, they'll see that cost can be exponentially low because they already have their towers and they just need to upgrade their system, and that will be very easy for them to provide the internet to the people. And so that we had these policy recommendations that government should not see providing spectrum as a revenue generating opportunity, but they should work on it to make it an important activity to be done by all the multinationals. They should encourage multinational telecommunications to collaborate and go for the tower sharing options. I was talking to one of the multinational representatives, and they tell that we are actually doing tower sharing right now. And they also told us that they tend to discontinue services where they find that the population is less and they are going in losses because nobody is willing to bear losses. So government can subsidize in those particular areas. They can do geographical pricing for that, and can help in providing internet to those areas. Freelancing and cottage industry is very important, and they both can be enhanced quite a lot if government takes it on. It is an important task and try to provide internet to all the far-flung areas of the country, and they can connect through the usage of internet, and they can also provide them training so people can earn for their better livelihood, and of course to add to the GDP also. So the main objective of this study was to provide an estimation of costing to the multinationals and to the government so they can think about it and don't make it as an excuse to not provide internet to the people of the country. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, all three authors. So let's first hear from Ambreen Kayyum and Ms. Saba. So Ambreen, over to you.
Thank you, sir. I must say it's very interesting topic and very relevant to the current situation, especially in case of Pakistan.
Ambreen, can you come closer to the mic?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. It's very interesting topic and it's very relevant with the current situation of Pakistan. And I have just few observations that I want to share with you. and it might improve the quality of your working paper. So first, my question is like why you have chosen just one district in each, the province, because in Pakistan, the area is very large, and just choosing one district from each province, I think it's if you just increase the sample size, then how it will be a great idea. And my next question is like you have interviewed and you mentioned this. It's like 10 minutes interview, and you ask them about questions, and it's just a guessing of thing. Don't you think that just relying on one person's opinion will make a lot of difference in your costing estimates? This is my second comment. And next is like you told that you incorporated like area, population, and all these things. From all this, I can see like how you have incorporated actually the population thing. If you just explain these things in detail, like your methodology, in your methodology section, like how you have incorporated population in that calculation. Like let's suppose if it is 10 million, for 10 million, the area and let's suppose the subscribers are this one, how it will affect your, the outcome, the cost, if you can do things like that. And next is, have you check for the level of inflation and things like that, or regulations, because there are hurdles relevant to regulatory framework, like time they required to get approvals and stuff like that, how you have managed that thing in your costing of internet penetration in districts of Pakistan. And next is, okay, in the methodology section, I have just few observations. Like yes, I can understand there is a limitation on the data, and also the you won't find much studies on this, but there might be some other studies from where you can borrow this methodology. So it would be great if you just give the references to that studies that have actually chosen this methodology, and based on that they have given some sort of costing. And next is you chose Gujarat. So based on Gujarat and Kohar, do you think what's the existing level of penetration, the internet penetration? So based on that, let's suppose if they have 4 or 6 towers, and then from that onward, how can it will increase further cost? It's like there is no internet connectivity there, but what I can see from the internet, like from my research, like they still have few internet providers over there. So how you have tackled that thing? Like if there is existing thing, and then you are in further improving that, the penetration thing, that's a different thing. And let's suppose if there is some sort of like Larkana, I personally don't know like what's the connectivity level at the spot, but if let's suppose if there is no connectivity, what would be the thing? Have you considered these aspects or not? And next is okay, next is you discuss the spectrum price. Like if in your conclusion, like if there is low price, or if the government gives spectrum at a minimum price, it will be a great thing, and we can get more productivity benefits in the long run. So it will be great if you just look at the government, the perspective of the government, like why they are not reducing the price of spectrum, like what are the reasons behind this thing, or is there anything, something, the conflict between the buyer and seller, or it's just maybe who is like exercising its power, maybe or misusing its power. So it would be an important thing to discuss this in your study. And what if, let's suppose, the price of spectrum decreases or stuff like that, how it will increase the penetration thing. And next is, okay, and the last comment is if you could estimate the potential gain from that penetration, like if there is increase in connectivity in a certain district, how it will increase the productivity, or how it will increase the profit of the the services sector, or you might in the IT, like how these telecommunications companies can earn more revenues from that. So it will be a cost benefit analysis, so it will give a bit more clear picture of things. These are just my few suggestions, and thank you.
Thank you, Ambreen, for detailed comments, and thank you for doing this on a very short notice. Sabha, would you like to add on anything?
Yes, Dr. Aziz, thank you so much. Thank you, Amreen. Very interesting paper and equally interesting comments. I mean, most of the questions that I had have been asked by Amreen. So I'll skip those. My questions were more related to methodology, more pertinent to what sort of land prices have been used. I mean, so just to get an idea of the land structure which is there, or differential in land pricing which is there, because that's what we have read and that's what we have heard, that when you start building towers, the land, since there is a shortage of land, so the infrastructure companies or the or the mobile companies, they face undue land prices for the towers. So that's what I wanted this paper to reflect upon. Also, now that we have talked about tower sharing, we can, I think, if we can add a couple of more points to this analysis, like tower sharing in terms of 3G, or tower sharing in terms of 4G, or active tower sharing or passive tower sharing. I think this would add to the depth of the analysis of this paper and would be more interesting for the readers. That's all that I have to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabha, and thank you again for doing it at a very short notice. Let me add something, and then the authors can respond in one go. So probably to estimate the subsidy, etc., probably if you can also work out, give us some idea of the return to the, well, you said that the cost would be 971 million. So in what time period, what would be the return on equity to the service providers if they make this investment, and in how much time this would pay off, or what kind of service charges they would have to levy to achieve a certain return. Things like that, if you can dilate upon these, this would make, this is a good paper in the sense that it's a good beginning, and a lot more details can be added, and this could be probably some detailed study whereby we would go probably in every district and estimate the cost. And probably, as I think Amreen Asad also mentioned, that you have to take first a baseline would be required, that this is the current level of connectivity, and to achieve full level of connectivity, this additional investment is required. Again, then there is issue of, I'm not sure, you haven't told us, I think, that you're assuming provision of 3G or 4G or what. And then there was recently a news that spectrum prices have been approved by the government, 31 million for something like 19 megahertz or something, and then 21 for, but those prices were for per megahertz, and these prices are in dollars. So do you have an idea what kind of, how many megahertz the service providers would need to provide a sufficient level of internet connectivity, and what would be their total cost? So if all these can be dilated upon, and further, of course, this paper was from the supply side, but then somebody can also look into the demand side as well, that what would be the level of affordability. We know the poverty level in the country. So those, for example, who are relying upon support from BISP, would they be able to afford the connectivity charges? And if not, then how we have to ensure internet for all? If this demand side can also be covered, maybe in a separate paper on this paper, it would be good. The authors, would you like to say anything? And then we will move to the floor.
Ji sir, thank you very much. Thank you, Ma'am Amreen. Thank you, Ma'am Sabha. Thank you, sir, for very valuable comments and questions. So, okay, I'll go, point. Definitely love if you people can, provide us more information regarding how we can add and improve the paper. Okay, so first question was why we went for one district in each province. The reason was when we talk about the internet provision, and we have seen that the penetration has been amazing in Punjab and Sindh, but when we go to KPK, including FATA and Balochistan, it is quite less. So basically, when we chose these 4 districts, Gujarat has amazing penetration and connectivity already. Okay, but why we chose these districts were they were actually kind of reference for all kind of area types that we have. You know, there can be the river going on from in between. There are hilly areas, and there are deserted areas, of large area with quite less number of population and all that, which were making issues. So how we can manage those given the specifications that we had. So that was the one point, but a very valid point that how we went about it. Okay, so that 10-minute interview was actually a mistyping, a typing error in that we did not talk to only 3 people, but they were the 3 main relevant people who provided us all the infrastructure related information. We started with multiple people and trying to tap the right kind of people, but of course it was quite difficult. They were not willing to share the prices at all. Sir, coming to your point, I would like to add that point there, that what are the spectrum prices, what are the total cost, how much frequency they require. They were completely quiet on that. They were not willing to share their data with us, despite telling them that it is just for the academic purposes, but they were not willing to provide that data. Gujarat and Kohat, as I just mentioned, that Kohat has hilly areas, Masoon has large areas with quite less number of population. Gujarat is one area which is densely populated and has good penetration. So areas like that in other districts and in other provinces, how they can tap those. We got to know the perspective of government quite late. We had already submitted this, but of course, I am trying to add a bit of that in the paper to improve it. Okay, ma'am, Sabah's question, when we come about land pricing, the land pricing differs from place to place. I mean, in Punjab, the prices are high. In KPK and Balochistan, the prices are low. So that's what they were giving us. One standard price of that ranges from 8 million to 15 million. Given the height of tower, either they are going to purchase the land or they are going to use commercial buildings. And they told us that they prefer already built up setup where they just, install their infrastructure and keep paying them monthly basis, and that is major cost in their operating expenses, monthly operating expenses. Again, they told us that they are going to share towers now, but they didn't tell us that how they are doing that, despite a lot of probing and trying to get the information. But again, they were not trusting us in any way with those. Coming back to the point of return on investment, of course, we haven't calculated that, but of course we can do that in the future. And so we would like to have your guidance on it, that how we should go about it. And currently they are talking about provision of 4G. When they said that they have their microwave dishes that are already there, and they have a number of particular slots that how many people are using 2G services or 3G services at one particular time. So they need to just increase the spectrum frequency, whatever spectrum frequency they have bought, they just need to update that. This is what they told us. And on those basis, we did a very standardized costing analysis. To again, the purpose of this objective was to begin the debate of costing side. We always talk from demand side, sitting in an urban area, or the students that go to far-flung areas and then they complain about it. But there had been issues from the supply side, and we tried to keep government as a supporter right now and use private sector and provide them a costing that how they can go about it. All the comments are very valuable, and we'll be seeking more information and help from all of you people, and we'll try to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Fizza, and Sambreen and Sabah, if you can provide your comments in writing, that would be great. This would be helpful to the authors. And now there is a question from Meher Zadi. Ms. Meher, please go ahead. Meher Zaidi, please unmute your mic.
Go ahead,
Hello.
madam.
Ji.
Can you hear me? Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, yes, Walaikum Assalam. We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such an interesting and important presentation. I have one
Ms. Meher, can you
comment
please
or
introduce
you would
yourself?
suggest. Hello, I am Dr. Meher Akhtar. I run Khatoon Health Services, which covers women and children, and especially schools and poor women in Islamabad and Rawalpindi. And I do social work also, especially dealing with women empowerment. So my suggestion or comment, humble comment would be that please introduce internet banks, and you can use the medium of agricultural banks, which are already present in all the areas in Pakistan, to facilitate especially women and poor women access to internet. Thank you so much.
What is meant by internet banks? I've heard.
Thank you, ma'am, for your comment. Actually, we can add this in the policy recommendations that we are doing right now, because when we were talking about cottage industry and freelancing, we were actually meaning to empower youth and women. We can add that in our policy recommendations. Currently, if internet will be everywhere, the things will come as part and parcel of the
Thank you so
internet
much.
provision. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other question from the floor? Okay, Ji, if there is a question from in the chat from Sabah that how does the existing towers affect the cost? So probably you have answered this, Fiza.
Yes, sir, I have answered that. Because when we're talking about ease of provision, that means they already have their towers and they have to increase their capacity of their dishes. So by that, of course, the cost of setting up an infrastructure from scratch will be reduced exponentially.
Okay, I think we had a great discussion on two good papers. I would request the authors to incorporate the comments and submit the paper for publication. Going through, and I would also request the authors that to reduce the editing task at our end, please at least use some software, editing software like Grammarly, etc., before you submit the paper to us. Thank you. Thank you all the participants and all the authors for presenting the paper and for a great discussion. Looking forward to see you next time. Allah Hafiz.